Welcome to this special webinar, Trump Policy, Scope and Implications. My name is Dr. Stephen Sussman. I'm a professor of public administration in the Andreas School of Business and Public Administration at Barry University in Miami, and co-founder of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research. Dr. Luis Fleischman and I, along with a team of dedicated colleagues, established the center as an outlet for the marketplace of ideas. The Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research is a nonpartisan public policy organization, a research center, and a think tank. We are a gathering of scholars, experts, and community stakeholders. And here's Dave Aronberg, engaged in research and dialogue in an effort to create practical policy recommendations to current local, national, and international challenges. Our core values of diversity, balance, and community define us and set us apart from other organizations. As an organization, we value diverse voices and views and see it as a means to create a healthy debate. The center provides a balanced platform where civilized communication, exchange of ideas, and inclusion prevail over party politics and dogmatic views. Our objective is to be a community and place of gathering for academics, professionals, elected officials, decision makers, and civil society groups and leaders. Please visit our website at palmbeachdemocracy.org. On the site, you will find links to our past webinars and links to many articles we've published over the years. Additionally, on our site, you'll find the donation button. We are a 501c3. Through your generous donations, we are able to bring you important and timely programs and articles. Before turning it over to Luis, who will formally introduce our distinguished moderator and panelists, I'd like to briefly highlight the remarkable group joining us today. We're privileged to host a panel of distinguished experts whose diverse backgrounds will enrich our discussion on the scope and implications of Trump policies. Dave Aronberg, former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, offers a practitioner's view from the front lines of law enforcement and public policy. Dr. Marshall DeRosa brings a scholarly perspective on constitutional interpretation and American political thought. Dr. Joel Levin, as a professor of law and philosophy, provides insights into the philosophical foundations of law and governance. And guiding our conversation is our esteemed moderator, Dr. Alvin Felzenberg, a presidential historian and author whose deep knowledge of American political leadership will help frame today's discussion. I will now turn it over to Dr. Fleischman, who will formally introduce our distinguished moderator and panelist.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve. And I want to repeat some things that Steve said, just to emphasize, not just repeat, that our think tank, the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research, has been created in order to create or promote dialogues between different views. And indeed, if you look at our articles and programs, you are going to see different views. We are going to see more liberal, more conservative, in the middle, centrist. And the idea is promotion of democracy, and we care about democracy not only in this country, but also abroad, because after all, I think the stability of the world depends also on strong democracies. And unfortunately, we are experiencing now a situation where democracy is being challenged in general in the world, including in parts of the Western world. I want to also I want to thank the panelists and the moderator for agreeing to participate today. And I will proceed to introduce the moderator and the panelists. The first thing that I want to say is that the moderator will ask a number of questions to the panelists, and then it will be open to the audience. You can raise your hand and ask to speak, or you can put your question, place your question on the chat. Steve will moderate the questions on the chat. First, the moderator, Dr. Alvin Felzenberg. Dr. Felsenberg is a nationally recognized expert on the American presidency, the United States Congress, and political movements. He served in senior positions in 2 presidential administrations and in the House of Representatives. He was the principal spokesman for the 9/11 Commission, and he also served as Assistant Secretary of State in New Jersey under the administration of Governor Tom Kean, who was also, as you remember, the chairman of the 9/11 Commission. Dr. Felsenberg holds a PhD in politics from Princeton University. He taught communications and political history at the Aronberg School of Communications at the University of Pennsylvania. He has been a fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government and has taught at Princeton, Johns Hopkins, and George Washington Universities. He's the author of several books and articles. Felsenberg is a former columnist for the US News and World Report and also for Fox News. He has appeared on major TV shows, including Morning Joe, The Michael McCormick Show, NPR Talk of the Nation, C-SPAN Washington Journal, CNN Crossfire, and a few others. And his writings have appeared in the Washington Post, the Weekly Standard, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Boston Globe, the Christian Science Monitor, Politico, and National Review. David Aronberg. David Aronberg served 3 terms as the elected state attorney for Palm Beach County from 2012 to 2024, where he led a team of 115 prosecutors and 180 professional staff in 5 offices throughout Palm Beach County. He is also a former Assistant Attorney General, White House Fellow, and Florida Senator. Mr. Aronberg is known nationally as the creator of the Sober Homes Task Force that made more than 120 arrests for patient brokering and insurance fraud in the rehabilitation industry, and has led to several new Florida laws and regulations that have become the model for other states. He was elected to be one of the 15 White House Fellows from across the country. In this nonpartisan position, he served in 2 presidential administrations as Special Assistant to the Secretary of Treasury for international money laundering. Aronberg was elected to the State Senate in 2002 as its youngest member and served until 2010. Afterwards, he served as a special prosecutor for prescription drug trafficking in the Florida Attorney General's office under Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, now the National Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney General, sorry. The second speaker, Marshall DeRosa, Dr. Marshall DeRosa, received his PhD and master's from the University of Houston and his BA from West Virginia University. His teaching career includes David's at Elkins College, Louisiana State University, and he was also a full professor of political science at Florida Atlantic University. He is a Salvatori Fellow with the Heritage Foundation and currently National Association of Scholars Chapter Interim President of the Florida Association of Scholars. He has authored numerous articles and reviews in professional journals and authored 5 scholarly books. He has lectured in England, Ireland, Austria, Germany, and across the United States. His teaching research specializations are constitutional law and policy making, law and American society, the judicial process, and American politics. He currently works with the Florida Department of Corrections, providing civics educations to incarcerated felons. Last but not least, Dr. John Levin. For 4 decades, John Levin has been a commercial litigator and civil rights advocate, university teacher, and author. His 4 books include well, he wrote 4 books, okay, and also several playwrights, several plays. He's presently working on another book, and he received his BA and master's at the University of Chicago, his JD at Boston University, and his doctorate at the University of Oxford. In addition to founding 2 high-tech companies, he has taught law and philosophy in Russia, Canada, and a number of American universities, including Case Western Reserve, for close to 40 years. So without further ado, I want to thank the moderator and the panelists, and without further ado, Alvin, the floor is yours. You are mute, Alvin, you are mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, all right. Technology is not my thing. We can talk other things, constitutions. I couldn't last for 3 minutes. I was talking about computers. Okay. I'm honored to be here. This is a very prestigious group. And what I'd like to do, I want to throw a couple of questions out and have our 3 panelists comment. But I also know we have a lot of expertise in our group today. And I would like to have a lot of time to have some questions from them and maybe some discussion. So we've heard a lot about democracy right now. We've heard a lot about constitutional law that all of our panelists have had a background in. So I'll just get right to it. When I taught not only constitutional law at the undergraduate level, and get to the specialization we're going to hear today, we heard a lot about separation of powers, enabling legislation. We were told that the president can't spend a dime unless Congress appropriates and authorizes. 2 separate, the Budget Act that was passed in the Nixon era separated those functions. And the same thing on the way out. If you want to abolish an agency or a department that was set up by Congress, it has to go back to Congress. I don't think I'm the only one who used to think that and was taught that. But every day we see on the order of the President of the United States, agencies are being dismembered. Radio for Europe goes back to the Truman administration. Some very known Americans have been on the board and have actually broadcast on that network. Same thing is true with Radio Marty. George Bush's shining hour on the domestic side and the international side, George W. Bush, was the PEPFAR program. And I've been trying to find out for 5 weeks now what is going on with that. Rubio said it was not ended. And then any website I go to talks about not only increased cases, but beginning to have some deaths and medicines rotting at docks and all of that. So my question is, did I teach my students the wrong thing? They don't need Congress to deauthorize an agency Congress created. And if I am right, why is it not happening? And what does it take to get the Congress and the courts engaged? I assume with the courts, we need a case. I think we have maybe 100 cases now. How do we get Congress to do its job? And I'll just throw it out. I'd love your opinions here. You've all had experience. Thank you.
You want to call on someone, Alvin?
I'm sorry. Dave, why don't we start with you? You've had a lot of litigation experience, maybe not on this topic, but you know your way around.
Sure, and thank you for having me. This is the first time in history, as far as I know, that a branch of government has self-emasculated itself, has decided to give up all of its power. The legislative branch has decided to cede its power to the executive branch. And so it is no longer, at least not now, a check or balance. So we're left with the judiciary, which is doing its best. It is a firewall. And that's why Trump is so angry at it, where he is going after them and calling them out And you're seeing members of his administration do that, go after judges. And that's what led Chief Justice Roberts to come out with an extraordinary statement to say that impeachment is not the proper remedy if you disagree with a judge's ruling. It's appeal. Now, I don't think we're at a constitutional crisis yet, because even though the Trump administration is bashing the judiciary, they have not said that they are going to defy court orders. Now, they may be acting like that, but they are saying, even as they refuse to cooperate with Judge Boasberg's order on the deportation of Venezuelan and alleged gang members, that the order was not applicable because it was issued after the planes were already in the air in international airspace, and they're complying with the written order, not the verbal order. That's all, games. That's not. I mean, they're not being serious about that. But at least they're not saying we are defying the court's order because we do not recognize the judiciary branch as a co-equal branch of government. That's when you have a constitutional crisis, when they say that we are walking away from their system of checks and balances that have served us so well over the past, 250 plus years. So what we're dealing with now is we're on the steps of a constitutional crisis, but we're not through the door yet. And I think it will depend what happens with the Supreme Court. I do think the Supreme Court will ultimately restore some balance. And I think that because Trump likes the Supreme Court, thinks that they're good to him, that he will comply with their rulings, even if it's against them, his administration. So I do think we are in uncharted territory right now, but we haven't crossed the Rubicon. And one day, perhaps after the midterms, the legislative branch will then flex its power again and become a co-equal branch of government. But that day is not today.
I'd like to respond, Alvin, if I may. This
Please.
is Marshall DeRosa. I'm going to somewhat disagree with Dave and make the point that we are and have been for some time at a constitutional crisis. So we have to consider at least taking the Constitution seriously. Article 1, Section 1 says that all legislative power shall be vested in the Congress of the United States. So in 1948, and this is just one step in a long march, the U.S. Congress passed the Administrative Procedure Act, which in my opinion is a violation of the non-delegation doctrine. So the Congress gave the power to the executive branch to make laws, essentially, basically administrative laws. And those administrative laws being made, you could go to the Federal Register, thousands and thousands of them, impacting, in many instances, negatively impacting the lives of Americans, the regulations and such. And so the president does have a lot of discretion in executing those laws, because he is, under the two presidency theory, the chief executive domestically, but also in foreign policy. And you could also take a foreign policy issue, the 1973 War Powers Act, where the United States Congress delegated to the President of the United States the war-making power. And the Constitution says only Congress shall make and declare war. Now, it's limited war, but we all know that the Congress does not follow up in reviewing the United States president engaging U.S. forces in war without congressional consent necessarily. There's consent, but it's not the way the framers intended it. So we are at a constitutional crisis. Checks and balances, separation of powers, in many instances have become meaningless. And not only that, now there's this new branch of government, and that's the administrative state. Presidents, Republican and Democratic presidents, cannot control the bureaucracy, the administrative state. It's a free agent in many of these areas in which they have jurisdiction over policy. So my point is that we are and have been at a constitutional crisis. And President Trump is using the only real weapon in his arsenal, executive directives, to bring this under control and to bring the government in line with what his constituency wants. So when you see, when the only thing you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. He doesn't control Congress. We just saw this afternoon, Stefanik her nomination to be UN ambassador was withdrawn because the margin of the Republicans is so thin in the House. So President Trump's at war, not only with the Democratic Party, but also with the many Republicans, the neocons specifically. So insofar as checks and balances, separation of powers, in many instances, been a dead letter, the Constitution that is, for a very long time. And that's my opinion. And this is coming from basically, public choice theory of politics. And that's the way it is when power is centralized nationally. No one man can really control it, president, cabinet secretaries, whatever the case might be. It's just a huge behemoth that has run out of control.
Would Joe like to add anything to this?
Well, let me try to be brief. Not easy for me. Let me say that I disagree with both speakers slightly. I think if you listen to what Pam Bondi has said and what JD Vance said, they're not going to listen to the courts. So I don't think, I just take them at their word. I don't like their word, but I think there is no inclination to follow the courts. And that Trump's favorite president, Andrew Jackson, famously said, or apocryphally said, after a John Marshall opinion he didn't like, John Marshall made the law, now let's see if he can enforce it. And he didn't, and he couldn't. And I think that's what's going to happen. As for the Administrative Act, which is a huge area in the world, I just think that a lot of people sitting quietly in academic offices in America have decided they don't like the Administrative Act, and that Congress should get involved in everything from minute securities regulation to tax regulations to what counts as a landfill. And the Administrative Act is how modern states run. So while it may not have been in Madison's mind, I think it's required. But I do agree that the Lord Powers Act is unconstitutional. And I don't know why Congress gave that power to the president after Vietnam, which seemed to be something they cared about. So let me just say about the Supreme Court and predicting the Supreme Court when they get this. Hardly a liberal, I would quote Chief Justice Rehnquist, who said, "It is, in our view, extremely difficult to formulate a constitutional theory to justify a refusal by the president to refuse to comply with a congressional directive to spend." Another liberal, Brett Kavanaugh, "Even the president does not have unilateral power to refuse to spend." And when Richard Nixon didn't want to spend money on New York City because it was full of people he didn't like, in Train versus New York City, in a 9-0 opinion, it said that allocated money by Congress to clean up New York's water system had to be spent. So while I don't have much faith in the Supreme Court, for those of you who read my articles, I would say that all the way on both sides, it's clear that money has to be spent, and the agencies can't be closed because that money is to be spent. And they seem to have closed FEMA today, and another 10% of human services, health and human services. So,
well, again, FEMA was established by statute.
Right.
I don't know where the sponsors of those statutes are. Maybe they've long gone, met the reward, but it would seem to me someone could get to the floor. Any of the governors can sue on the grounds that this is the only way that they can get help from the federal government during flood control and hurricanes.
People are suing. I mean, there's in preparedness, there's hundreds of suits on everything. I mean, I
know.
I mean,
but obviously they don't think it's going to be reversed. Are there any cases where the court took the president to task for self-abnegating a power that Congress intended him to do when it comes to enforcing the law. Are there any cases where they said he must do what they wanted by statute?
When the Nixon administration, when he was impounding funds,
No.
the court did take him to task for that. And going back to the Trump administration, I'm not sure that he's eliminating departments and agencies per se, but the question might be, does he have the discretion to reduce the size and scope of those agencies and departments? So for example, USAID
Yes.
was transferred over to the Secretary of State, Department of State. And they're still using a lot of those funds for purposes that a lot of Trump supporters would be opposed to. For example, funding LGBT plus type movements in regimes that they're trying to undermine, whether Venezuela, Iran, or whatever. So the government is kind of, we're looking at this through a very distance, and it's difficult to see what's actually happening behind the scenes. But insofar as what I'm reading is that departments will be reduced in size and scope, and the money, insofar as intergovernmental transfers, will still be spent, but will be left to the discretion of the states of how those funds will be sent. So the intent of Congress still may be enforced, but not through the mechanisms that have been in place for the last several generations.
What kind of gets us to the next topic with democracy. Now, when I moved to Washington in 1990, the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, democracy was much on the march. A number of organizations were started to assist the struggling new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, and Russia itself. And it was Bill Clinton who got Boris Yeltsin to agree that he would recognize a free Ukraine. And in exchange for those guarantees, they gave up the nuclear weapons. So, I mean, and the National Endowment for Democracy was a Reagan initiative, the foundation that helps democratic movements around the world. And then the crowning glory to that was supposed to have been the Peace Institute, which was dismembered about a week ago. Now, it's not a federal agency. It was set up to be independent of the federal government, but they receive lots of money from the federal government. What happens to the money now that he's abolished it outright? My first question. But the second question is, we now seem to have democracy. Well, I won't say going to an eclipse, but there are a number of nations that have pulled back from those hopeful days. Hungary probably leading the pack. We can think of some other examples in Central America and Russia itself. Again, we haven't heard much. I mean, I remember the Fulbright hearings. They didn't end the war, but they certainly draw attention to how decision-making was made in the White House. I remember John Kerry's rather long testimony when he was representing a group called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. The War Powers Act, which somebody mentioned, that was justified at the time by senators like Senator Javits was the key sponsor, but several were on that bill, as restricting the president's power to commit troops. He's now now they're calling it enabling him to wage war. He had to stop an undeclared war within 60 days unless he got an authorization from Congress to continue it. That was never enforced. They tried to get Obama to limit our involvement in Libya, and he told them no, and they never took it up. But these debates are back. What do you see as the future of democracy? And I'm back again. The Constitution normally gives the president a little more leeway in the foreign affairs and domestic affairs. But we do have a Foreign Relations Committee. I mentioned Senator Fulbright. I mentioned Henry Cabot Lodge. It certainly had a great deal to say when Woodrow Wilson wanted a certain treaty approved in a certain way. We don't do that anymore, do we? And what will it take to get the American people more engaged? I just saw a poll that said about 80% of the American people support Ukraine, regardless of party. The edge is a little better with the Democrats, but it's pretty strong. It's over 50% in both parties. And you have a president going not yet. We don't know where these talks are going. The opposite. So did we just move to Caesarism without a plebiscite? That the only thing you have, you vote for him one time for 4 years, and then the rest of the government keeps quiet, the private sector keeps quiet, the nonprofit center keeps quiet. And if I'm wrong, how do you wake a sleeping giant?
Well, if I must, let me just, this is the last thing I'm going to
Go
say,
ahead, I
but
beg you.
this is
Please.
kind of my pet peeve about democracy. If you read carefully Madison's Federalist Paper number 10, it makes it clear that democracy is the worst form of government. And it's theoretically impossible to have a democracy in a country of over 300 million people. It's just impossible. The size, the scale, the scope of the government. So let's call it what it is. It's what Madison anticipated and what Madison designed the system to be: factions, what we today call interest groups, more or less representing their respective constituents and pulling the, more or less, our consent is filtered through the interest groups that we are supposedly represented by. And those without influential interest groups are unrepresented in the political process. So insofar as democracy, yes, at the local level, democracy is possible when the people can exercise their consent or the lack thereof of local public policy. But we all know, and there have been peer-reviewed scholarly articles proving this, you can have an election and the political class ignores it. They might cater to the electorate during the electoral phase, but when they get in Washington, they know who pulls the strings, and that would be the interest groups, the funding sources for their campaigns, so on and so forth. We do have a republic, and that's a scheme of representation and a viable, healthy federal system in which consent from the local level in some magical way percolates up to the top of the pyramid. But we don't have a democracy. Madison, that's what the Constitutional Convention of 1787 was about. There was too much democracy under the Articles of Confederation, and it was chaotic. So they centralized power, not meaning to centralize it perhaps to the extent it's been centralized today, but we do not, and we probably should not, have a national democracy. That's the ruse that get rid of the Electoral College and have a national election based upon population for the president and vice president. That would disenfranchise most of the country and put political power on the East and West Coast. So insofar as democracy, local level, yes. National level, impossible. Even if it were, it's a bad idea. Interest groups, factions, that's what runs the government, and that's what the political class is accountable to. So what we're seeing in Washington right now is the struggle, because these interest groups don't like to have their boat tilted, and they're fighting like hell to keep the pork flowing their way. And that's why today we have a federal debt of $32 trillion. So that's my 2 cents.
What about the other professors and David?
The issues I have is that we have a neglected civics education, and you see that people don't know that they can name the American Idol judges quicker than they can name the Supreme Court justices. People just don't know. They don't know the 3 branches of government. There's hardly a word that the legislative branch has decided to step aside and abdicate its role as a co-equal branch of government. I mean, they're supposed to be the most powerful of the 3 branches. They're the branch with the power of the purse. They're Article 1, and yet they're just decided to just do whatever the executive branch wants without any pushback. And so I think civic education is a real necessity. I think we've gotten away from it, and you see the cost of it now. Plus, now you're in a different media environment. You know, I'm old enough to remember Walter Cronkite. So when we had one newscaster for the country, those days are gone. But now we have news catered to your own beliefs, confirmation bias, and an affirmation of your own views. And especially with social media, if you like something, then they're going to feed you more on that. So, you're not hearing from other sides. You're not getting the same facts as everyone else. You watch Fox News, it's entirely different America. You're watching with different facts. So that's another challenge. That's one reason why I like to try to go on the conservative shows, because I try to give them a viewpoint, facts that they're not used to. They need to, I think more Democrats need to go on conservative shows. And I think that's something that you're starting to see a little more of. And you saw that in the last election that, Kamala Harris didn't go on Joe Rogan. And I think that, we need to go on those alternative media sites and channels. And so I think that's two things I would do to improve our democracy. And then, of course, there's gerrymandering, which I've been railing against for years.
Right.
And that inhibits democracy. So if you want to throw the bums out who vote against your interest, well, good luck, because that district you live in has been designed to elect only a Republican or only a Democrat, and there are very few competitive districts left. And then you have the Citizens United, which has obliterated campaign finance reform, and so you have the presence of unlimited soft money and corporate money. So it makes it very hard for Mr. Smith to go to Washington today.
Well, you mentioned a couple of my pet. I want to hear from Joe, but you mentioned a couple of mine. Say someone is a Democrat living in Florida, third largest state in the country. And I don't remember. You'll tell me, what is the population of Florida these days? I don't really know anymore. I used to.
20 million.
20
million.
million.
Okay, third largest. Okay, if you're a Democrat, and the Republicans now have an edge in the registration here. If you're Democrat and voted for Harris, your vote didn't count, obviously, in the Electoral College. If you're living in any but 2 or 3 districts, your vote doesn't count because of gerrymandering. So either way we do it, we've disenfranchised half the country. I don't know if any states have tried. This is an option the Constitution allowed. I don't think anyone's ever done this, elected the entire delegation at large. We were children, we used to read about the Nixon, when we taught history, we used to read about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And he became a national star, losing the election, but it wasn't that the people voted for Mr. Douglas. It was a gerrymandered Democratic district or state, Illinois. It's quite clear Lincoln won a Pyrrhic victory. His speeches were read in every one of the states. It's to help run him for president. But Douglas was reelected because the British would call it rotten boroughs, but rotten state, Illinois, and that was even before Mayor Daley. They had gerrymandered, and you add up the Republican and Democratic vote for state legislature. And a Democratic legislature, malapportioned, was elected, and they vote for Douglas. So this has been a fault in the Constitution. Who am I to say that? Probably from the very beginning. We know they hated parties. They warned against parties. But it took Madison maybe 5 days in the new Congress to figure out that in order to get his point of view across, he had to get people to vote his way, and he became the first majority leader. So there we go. But why aren't they acting? Now, people will tell you that the Republicans won't act because they're terrified of being primaried, which gets us into campaign finance reform, which somebody mentioned a minute, I think you did a minute ago. Is there any way out? The only way to wake the voters up? They don't know why they're upset. They don't know how the system is designed to shortchange the average person, or at least you're told we have this menu, but your vote doesn't count if you're in the wrong persuasion. Either way, the same thing's true of Democrats in Montana. I don't think they get much play these days. And that's just an open question for anyone who wants to take it.
Maybe Joel, he hasn't spoken.
Well, I intensely dislike the Electoral College. We're the only democracy in the world that has anything like an Electoral College. I mean, there's a parliamentary system, and it's sort of complicated in the way that works. But in general, one person, one vote seems like a good system to me. But for people who want sort of minority interests to rule in various ways, the Electoral College is just fine. So if you want more democracy, then have more democracy, and have the person's vote in California count just as much as a person's vote in Ohio or in North Carolina. And it doesn't. And I do agree. The only way to begin to clean things up is get rid of gerrymandering and get rid of the bars to campaign reform. So the last thing I'd say, and I guess it's none of this is all addressing what other people have said, is I don't agree that we're not a democracy. I think democracy is a matter of degree. I think people who always say, well, we're not this, we're not that, because we're not 100%, aren't taking note of the way the actual social world works. We're somewhat democratic. We're quite a bit democratic. There was just an election in Pennsylvania for state senate where apparently people were upset with some of the things that have happened early along in the Republican presidential administration and switched to Democrat. So there's some democracy, and what we would want is more democracy. The answer to not having enough democracy is to have more of it, not to sit there and say, well, let's just let the interest groups do what they want. If they had less, if they couldn't give as much money, and if they weren't gerrymandering, and if they didn't have complete states they didn't need to worry about, so they could spend all their money on the so-called half dozen swing states, then you'd have more democracy. So I don't think it is as complicated as it's sometimes put.
After World War II, foreign policy took a new turn. We went ahead and did something never done before in the history of the world. We rebuilt our enemies. We turned our enemies into democratic nations, and we built at our expense to some degree in the short run, viable democracies, viable trading partners. And it created many things. The big one was NATO. The Marshall Plan actually did go out of business because it was so successful. One of the few things you can say about the IMF and the World Bank. And now our current administration doesn't seem like any of these entities. He's lectured NATO a lot, and he has a point about they're not paying their sufficiently for their defense, but it's also our defense, which somehow has been forgotten. The part of Kennedy's speech, people don't, the speech in Berlin, when he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," this has become a joke on Saturday Night Live because they're telling the world that he thought he was a jelly donut, because there's a donut called Berliner. Beyond that, the reason he said that line was that when the history of these times are written, they will say that Germany, he meant the rest of Europe, stood in the front lines at the most perilous time in the history of the world, almost gone to a nuclear catastrophe. And they stood in the front lines because they trusted us. And they were willing to take the first hit because they thought we would be there. A lot of people have said this is all unraveling right now. He's been quite critical of NATO without going back to Congress. We might deal with this again. Congress, in a bipartisan way, Senator Vandenberg, Republican isolationist before the war from Michigan, became Truman's partner in pushing a Marshall Plan and pushing NATO and all of those things. He brought most of the Republicans with him on that. If he decides to leave NATO, we're going to have the same discussion again we're having about VOA and AID and everything else. Will they just let him walk out? Is there going to be another way of starting a grassroots movement to keep the United States in the alliance? The final question is that I hear, not my final question, but I hear Europeans say, well, even if we remain, do they have to calculate every 4 years? Is America just going to do another 180-degree turn? And maybe they can plot their own defense without us. And they're trying to come up with a Ukraine policy with national security, with guarantees that may not include us. Where do you see this playing out? I throw it out to anybody. Anybody who'd like to comment on this?
Alvin, David Aronberg has to leave in a few minutes, so maybe
Okay.
he should go first.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is a tough one. You know, you see that Ukraine, even though Europe is stepping up, Ukraine is still bending over backwards to appeal to Donald Trump. They're appeasing Donald Trump, and there's a philosophy I think the Ukrainians are using, which is just to play the waiting game, because Vladimir Putin is the scorpion who convinces the frog to give him a ride on his back across the water. Because the frog believes that, well, you're a scorpion. If you kill me, if you stab me, and they'll both drown. And the scorpion convinces the frog, which is Putin convincing Trump to side with him, like he's convinced so many other presidents naively. These American presidents have believed, have looked in Putin's eyes and seen his soul. Well, then, of course, the Ukrainians are waiting for the scorpion to stab and kill the frog, and they both drown, because the scorpion is a scorpion, and that's who Vladimir Putin is. So the Ukrainians are going to wait till Putin humiliates Trump and does what he's already done. Remember, Trump thought he had a peace deal, and then Vladimir Putin embarrassed him and backed out of it. Now, can Trump be embarrassed? I don't know. But the scorpion in Moscow is going to be who he is, and the Ukrainians believe that, well, just we wait long enough that relationship will wither, and we'll see. But I think it just tells you that the Ukrainians and Europe still depend on the United States, even as Trump seemed to walk away from both of them. The United States is indispensable there, and I do think that leaving NATO would be a red line that perhaps enough old school Republicans would finally stand up against, or maybe I'm being naive about it, because Marco Rubio, who is a Russia hawk, who believes in NATO, has decided to abandon his principles, swallow his pride in his job, and maybe that's where we're going, just off the cliff like that, like a bunch of lemmings. So we'll see. But the answer is that you can't do it without America. And so that's really a perilous moment that we're siding with our enemies right now.
Anyone else like to weigh in on that?
I
just briefly, I disagree with the analysis of Putin, Russia posing a threat. Russia today is not the Soviet Union. When you go back and you consider what led the Minsk Accord and everything else, pushing NATO after the Bush administration promised that they would, and Secretary of State Baker would not expand NATO. It seems as though if there was an aggressor or hegemony, it was on the part of NATO and later the European Union. And speaking of scorpions, Zelensky isn't your poster boy for virtue and honesty. Ukraine has been rated the most corrupt country in the Western Hemisphere. So going back to Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex, cui bono, who benefits from this conflict? It certainly isn't the Ukrainians, the rank and file Ukrainians. It's the political class. It certainly isn't America. We don't benefit from billions of dollars being sent over to Ukraine. So who benefits? It's the political class. It's the globalists. It's the military-industrial complex. I think Putin is sort of the poster child to be demonized in an attempt to get people to support this horrible war, this boondoggle, that could trigger something much, much worse. So insofar as what Trump's doing with the Ukrainian issue, I mean, it needs to be done. The European Union stepped up to the plate and they said, okay, if the United States backs out, we'll do it. We'll raise $1 trillion, build our European army, so on and so forth. They saw how unrealistic that is, that their economies cannot sustain that. So once again, going back to the $32 trillion debt why should we be paying billions and billions of dollars in a war that is not in our national interest? Russia does not pose a threat to the United States of America. It does pose an opportunity for economic trade and good bilateral relations. So I think Trump's on the right path here. And maybe Rubio had an epiphany. And now that he has a different position, he's not accountable to the lobbyists that were pushing him to support this war. So, war is a terrible thing. And when you look at what happens, what's happening in the Ukraine, wow, it's a real tragedy. So you take people like Starmer, Macron, and the rest of them, they don't care about their own people. They care about something else. I can't put my finger on it. Others can. But it certainly isn't in the national interest of Great Britain or the French people. And if we get more involved, it certainly wouldn't be in our national long-term interest.
It's not in our interest to have a strong democracy in the center of Europe, the size of probably bigger than Texas.
What, Ukraine?
Yes.
It's not going to be a democracy. We've heard that with the Iraq situation. You could say, we can't import or export our democratic principles to countries.
That's not what I said. They're fighting pretty hard. A lot of people in Ukraine have lost their lives, are willing to recruit, are willing to stand there thinking that they can have a better life for their children. They were invaded. Why was the invasion?
The invasion was because the United States broke the Minsk Accord agreement and pushed NATO to the borders.
That was some time ago.
Can I?
So go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I mean, I've just, with all due respect, I mean, I've just heard a thing that is a parallel to a defense of Hitler in Czechoslovakia. I mean, my view here, and I've written about this in this forum, is just because somebody has some reason that they were insulted doesn't mean you launch an invasion where hundreds of thousands of people die. And the thought that there's both sides have something wrong because they did something wrong and someone promised at one point 30 years ago not to allow, not to expand NATO is not a reason to become a murderer. As for Eastern Europe in general, if you take a look at Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, it has become more and more democratic and less corrupt over the years. And Zelensky has been trying to fight corruption in every way. He's at war, which makes it difficult. And as for this rag on all of these European leaders, what do they want? It must be globalists, which traditionally means, if you look at the literature, Jews. If you take a look at Soros and the globalists and the Clintons and all these people, they just want to run up government debt. Some of these people actually believe in ethics, in morality, in virtue, in helping people who have been the subject of a murderous attack. Putin has murdered. I mean, I think it's obvious. I mean, I've lived in Russia twice, including under Putin. But I mean, he murders people by the thousands. He hasn't had an election in 25 years. People are poisoned who are against him. People who run against him die. They fall off ledges in hotels. The European countries are actually doing the right thing. It would be nice to think that America is interested in something other than its self-interest. It'd be nice to think that all of us are interested in something other than the greed that we see in the billionaire class, that we see in the right-wing think tanks, that we might actually want a better humanity on the globe, that we might want people to have vaccines in the third world, that we might want to have people have medical care and pension benefits here and elsewhere. And that's what the Europeans have been saying That's what they've been doing. And you can simply say, well, Hitler was justified. They wouldn't cancel the debt. He was under a lot of pressure. He didn't really pose a threat to America. And right, he didn't. And America didn't do anything, and 6 million Jews died. And that's what we're seeing. And I just think it's among the most outrageous. It's always hard to keep track of the most outrageous things that Trump does, but it's among the most. It's certainly the most outrageous thing about J.D. Vance.
Oh, I
Well,
said I would. Go ahead.
Stephen, can I say
I hear a
something,
voice.
please?
Is that
Stephen,
right?
can I say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say I want to open it up to people who haven't spoken yet. So
That's Robert,
Oh, okay,
Robert
sorry.
Reveal. Robert Reveal.
Robert, go
just-
ahead, please.
Yeah.
You know, I tend to stand with Marshall, not only on the ground that we went there, to the border, of St. Petersburg, but also, let's not forget, from George Kennan to Bradley to Richard Pipes to many others who mentions that our extension mainly to the border is going to create this reaction. So many people were not really stupid enough to think that by going there to their border, nothing's going to happen. More so, as a matter of fact, there is other things now. Let me go to 2014. 2014, you have a revolution, and United States openly sided with the opposition. More so, as a matter of fact, you have Nuland on record saying when the European wanted to stabilize the area, Nuland said, F the Europeans. Now, this is on one hand. So really, we painted Russia in a corner when Russia did not pose absolutely any threat to United States. And let me say that this is based on intelligence. This is based on many officials. More so now, we go mainly to what happened. The war, as a matter of fact, the first shot, and I really think that he did a strategic mistake and a blunder for going in. He would have done better by mainly laying siege like he did before and not go in, mainly using coercive diplomacy, not coercive military. But the point here mainly, after that, what happened is that you really, as a matter of fact, you split the world. The world really has been going on a trajectory between global north and global south. And that war really has divided the world, divided the world in many ways, not to the interest of Europe and not to the interest of United States. Look, for example, at United States power. The prince, did not pick up the phone when we called them. When the foreign secretary, our secretary of state, went to see him, they made them wait, from the afternoon to the next day. So mainly now, Brazil, India, our friend, it raised its trade with Russia 300%. China more, South Africa, Brazil. So mainly United States and Europe, as a matter of fact, it behooves them very well to locate themselves on the trajectory as the world move from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. So mainly, it's not only the interest of United States, it's the interest of Europe and the interest of the world. Also, again, a gentleman said about really, we have to be more humanitarian, this and this. Ukraine and Russia, they are really, the basket of bread for many countries in the world. I was born in Lebanon, and I know what happened in Lebanon. I know what happened in Somalia and Ethiopia and many other places. They don't have bread. Why they don't have bread? Because of the war. And here I'm not speaking about the Sahel region. So mainly the point is that war, from my position, really, forget the scorpion and I don't know about the frog. It had no good end in sight, and it could have led indeed to World War III. Here we have the most sanctioned country in the world with the country that has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And
So
if you think
international- I
Putin
have
is
to
not
grab
going to
the
use them,
cutting.
I think this is really not
I
good.
want to move this along, please.
And here I will end. Sorry?
No, okay.
Thank
Okay.
you, Robert.
Does anyone else have a thought?
Well,
question.
I'd like to say one quick thing, two
Please.
things, actually. A couple of my students are in attendance tonight, so I wanted to ask them if you guys have any
Please.
questions.
Please do.
Please ask questions or post them. Secondly, I posted a question because a few of you were talking about gerrymandering. So if you can see my question, I'll just say that 25 years ago, when I came to Florida, I was doing work at the Economic Council of Palm Beach County, a conservative business think tank. And we took a trip to Tallahassee, and I learned for the first time that there's a computer in Tallahassee where you can plug in all your data, to when you redistrict, I want to do it by race, I want to do it by anything you want. So there's my question. As redistricting increasingly relies on advanced data-driven software, capable of incorporating variables such as race, political affiliation, voting behavior, what safeguards can we put in place while still complying with the mandates to redistrict when we need to redistrict?
Well, the only thing that the courts seem to be interested in now regarding legislative seats, state legislative and congressional, is that the number of people per district is the same, which is the one man, one vote. And that majority districts where possible, consistent with the Voting Act, Voting Rights Act, will be preserved. But as long as you let, the only field I know of where we openly encourage self-interest is Congress votes on their own seats, and they can pick their voters. And James Madison would say the idea was the other way. By the way, he knew he wanted to be a senator. And Patrick Henry, the governor, the legislature appointed the senator in those days, and Henry had a machine. He was mad at Madison because Henry was an anti-federalist. So we sent James Monroe to the Senate, and Madison wound up getting a safe seat in Orange County, Virginia, which is how he got to Congress and how he's willing to take a devotion. So this has gone back a very, very long time. If somebody would try to extend, if the early Ralph Nader were around and completely with it, he would file a suit in that regard, that they shouldn't be judges in their own case, and they're the only people in the country who seem to think they are. This may change with the new series of events coming on.
There have been some states where there have been nonpartisan redistricting commissions. I mean, and there's some court cases about that. There was one in Arizona as to whether that was constitutional, and it was. And I think there's some other states, and there's been some referenda in states where people, I think in Ohio, have voted for it. And again, this is where, my view is it's a matter of degree. I think these commissions, I think the early analysis of these commissions is that there's less bad gerrymandering with these commissions, which tend to be made up entirely of people who aren't elected. They're sort of good government people, whatever that sort of has, that sometimes pejorative title is, and they tend to have more of a reflection of the state legislatures, and the congressional delegations look like the Gallup poll of the state than if you leave it to a legislature. And I think that is the way to go if you can get it to go.
They tried in California for a while. I don't know what happened. Arnold tried to do it that way. Have an equal number based on the portion of the party.
Yeah, California tried to do it. I don't know if it worked or not. I mean, I'm not, but I do think that's the way to go.
Let's hear from the student.
If any student has any questions, but Talia, who's on here, has a question. Okay. Can I first of all, Talia, I see your question. You're underselling yourself. You're a very bright person. Do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
Ask your question. Let us see you.
Ask her. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you. I was just telling I appreciate this discussion, but I was just saying to Steve that a lot of it is way above my understanding. But maybe I can look into PEPFAR. I actually used to work for PEPFAR. I can reach out to my contacts and find out what's going on over there. Anyway, but I was just saying, what if what's going on right now, Trump's recent handling of the Ukraine and Russian conflict is just kind of the US's new way of just putting Putin on the back burner in the meantime. You know the saying, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So just putting him on the back burner while we deal with more other important geopolitical and internal issues. And maybe there's another bigger plan later on.
And I'm sorry, Talia, I saw you sent it as a direct message. I apologize.
Okay.
That's okay. No, hey, if I join you, I might as well,
Okay. Yeah,
I should be
yeah.
confident
Well,
to speak
I
up.
will just go to, we're hearing a lot about balance of power politics. And they're telling us that we're going back to spheres of influence. We're going back to the age of Louis XIV. That the most important le toi c'est moi, so that's he'd be very much at home in Washington right now, Louis XIV. And he and Charles the II of Britain, and whoever the king of declining Spanish Empire at the time was, would divide the world between them, among them. And they had a number of wars that produced, of course, economic devastation for many. They did have a French Revolution. They did have Napoleon. And then to get rid of that, they had a treaty of the world that Metternich and Disraeli and many others convened. And a fellow named Metternich, you've heard of. And they had a balance of power for better part of the latter part of the 19th century, which is their NATO in a way. So we're getting to a situation now that the power that has the nukes will now decide the map. And so Trump, people report, thinks that Putin and she and he will divide it up. And of course, we take all of North America, and Canada becomes perhaps our Ukraine in somebody's mind. Mexico maybe as well. I don't know where you get Greenland into North America without a saw, but okay, it's another matter. But then Russia can have most of Europe, and Xi can now attack China, attack Taiwan, as if our treaties don't matter. Well, maybe we're losing our values, maybe we're losing our conscience, maybe we're losing our humanity. We thought in 1945 we could stop that from happening again. They did a mixed job. I won't say a perfect job, but they kept the peace for 80 years. And they had a series of test ban treaties and reductions in armaments. The last event came under Reagan, when all these democratic institutions were established that I mentioned earlier. What was the day with the United States of America that created the spark of liberty, the concept that we're all equal in the eye of each other, in the eye of the laws, in the eye of God. And everybody has rights. You don't get them from the government. You're born with them. And the government is to guarantee them. And when you take it to an international stage, that is what the United Nations was supposed to do. And now I never saw or see the United States on a human rights issue asking Putin to stop the invasion. I don't think there's anybody alive. We can argue that he had grievances. We can argue there are issues. We can't deny that he invaded. We've got the film. Thank God for that part of technology. We've got the film. And he is destroying a good part of the country. So we have a resolution in the United Nations, not a group I say many things good about, that is trying to call on him to stop. And we vote with such wonderful countries as North Korea and Russia and Belarus against all of our friends, against France, against Britain, against the Netherlands, against the Danes, against people who've sacrificed at great cost to keep their democracy alive. They're small countries. The Danes know why they fought for freedom. They fought tremendously. Even the Finns stood up to Stalin because they believed what they thought we believed. And they maneuvered very well. So it's a bad time. And that's my response, that what was the day we decide that the guy with the most power, that might makes right, then you have no constraint at all on the worst sides of human nature that Hobbes wrote about.
So I will, I just got a note from Skip. Skip has a question.
Go ahead, Skip. Are you on, Skip?
Yeah, he is, but he's trying to
Oh, he's got my
unmute
problem.
himself.
Can't find the
Yeah,
unmute.
yeah.
Can't
right,
find the unmute
right.
button. All right.
You can't use, you have to have a PhD to figure it out here. I'm telling you that.
Well, try to park in Palm Beach with the
Right.
new parking meters. You need 3 PhD.
So I have oh, there you got it, Skip. Go ahead.
Hello, Skip. Hi.
There are other elements that you gentlemen haven't hit on. I watch the markets every day.
Yeah.
Around the world, you've got realignments almost on a daily basis now because of what's happening with this idiot in the White House. I'm an automobile manufacturer in Detroit. I got real problems. In the last 4.5 weeks, the stock market has lost $4 trillion in value, not billion, trillion. They're going to end up pushing us, squeezing us more and more, and we're allowing them to do that, and we deserve it because it is idiot in the White House. My question simply is this. I'm a bit of an American history buff, as you all are, and you're much more advanced than I am educationally. If the American public doesn't wake up by one means or another, I'm sorry to say this country is in extremely difficult trouble. We could go down the drain because Europe is now turning their back against us, and rightfully so. China must be dancing in the streets of Shanghai or Beijing. And Putin must be dancing in the streets. Of course, Putin has a useful idiot that we all know. It's when you look at the totality of what's happening in such a short space of time, ordinary people can't grasp it. I'm down here in South Florida. I'm a snowbird. I go to a discussion group every 2 weeks where I'm living. These people who are educated people, professional people, can't grasp what's going on in DC. They don't want to, and some of them don't want to grasp it. And you can't blame them, or older people. If something radical doesn't happen, I think it's going to have to be external. I think the world markets at all are going to force the issue in this country. How does Ford and Caterpillar and Boeing and GM sit by and watch billions of dollars in sales go down the drain because their parts are now made in Mexico or Canada or Vietnam, and they're now going to have to pay 25% more for a part that costs $100, and you walk into the dealership, they're going to say, gee, we have to charge another 25%. And you say, you know what? I think I'll buy a used car. The totality of what's happening, most people, again, even educated people where I'm at, can't grasp it. They don't want to grasp it on the one hand, and some of them are making excuses. They're just off the wall. But if you look around the world, I'm being redundant, I apologize.
It's okay.
We are being forced into a corner. It's that simple.
Could someone make that into a question to answer, Skip?
Well, just very briefly, I mean, that $4 trillion known as intangible wealth was created out of nothing and returned to nothing. It has no real value. It's just intangible. Whereas what Trump's doing, and this goes back to the Russian issue, he's trying to protect the petrodollar. If the division between the United States and Russia continues, BRICS grows, SWIFT is done, the petrodollar collapses, and you'll be in a lot worse shape on Wall Street once the petrodollar collapses and BRICS starts taking the initiative and replacing the petrodollar.
Why would it?
Even though brokers on Wall Street can bemoan loss and intangible wealth, this is what MAGA is all about. The auto worker in Detroit, Cleveland, steel worker in Pittsburgh is going to be pleased to see opportunities, jobs coming back into the United States. A 25% tariff, it's going to be a rough ride in the transition period, but it's going to rebuild, hopefully, the American economy and make us less dependent on foreign countries, which once again is in our national security interest. So yes, I mean, Skip, what he's saying is right. The Wall Street's going to take a hit, but who's going to suffer? Maybe some pension funds, maybe not, but not the average worker, the MAGA constituent that the Trump administration is trying to bring back and revive. So yes, this is that political warfare. Politics, you have winners and losers. Maybe Wall Street brokers this time will be on the losing end, and the average American working stiff will be on the winning end. That's just how politics plays out.
Let me just say, let me just pop in as a retired law school professor who lives on the intangibles of Wall Street. So who cares about Wall Street losses? That if my intangibles in the market go down and I don't have enough money to live, I move out of the apartment that I'm in into a lesser apartment. And the idea that you can bring everything back to the United States when you have a world economy, that you can go back to the world of James Madison, is when it costs almost nothing to make electronics in China and Singapore. It cost nothing to make clothes in Bangladesh or drugs in India. The only way you can go back is you will have very expensive prices. People will be taking a look at their $400 televisions and paying $2,000 for it. And when they make all these GM cars here, they won't be able to sell them anywhere in the world except here. And American industry sells all over the world. So this kind of backward looking view that that's kind of globalist. Let me again plead guilty. I mean, is just put together not by anybody that I know who are good PhD economists who actually look at this stuff. I'm not talking about Wall Street and the evil bankers there apparently who have my pension fund, who I hope will make enough money so that I can pay my rent. But if you take a look at academic economists, they think it's ludicrous, these tariffs, and they think and the economy has suddenly in 60 days taken a hit from that it hasn't had in decades. And
let me ask you this, Joel: why do the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, why do they have tariffs on importing American automobiles into their countries?
Well, they don't import that many American automobiles, but they import a lot of.
That's why, because of the tariffs that are imposed on them. Try to sell an American automobile in Europe and look at the hit you take on the taxes those countries charge in the form. They built their economies at our expense. Trump's just trying to level the playing field. So apparently Chinese, Japanese, German economists say this thing works to build a national domestic economy.
When you go to Europe, you find a huge number of the automobiles are Japanese and are Korean. And so the tariffs there are the same as they are in America. When I lived in England for a number of years, and the view of people in England up and down was that American cars were junk. And they were buying Toyotas and they were buying Hondas, but they weren't, but the American cars were not as good. So, I mean, I guess I believe in capitalist markets. Maybe you don't. I believe in capitalist markets.
No, I do.
Then
but a level
you believe in capitalist markets, then what Trump is doing is destroying capitalist markets. He's in a reckless way, not in any kind of textured way, putting like 25% here and 35% there and 10% somewhere else in a kind of haphazard way. And with threats, if you guys get together, I'm going to double it. I'm going to triple it. I don't like you. And by the way, Canada, we're going to do just what Putin did to Ukraine. We're going to invade Greenland. We're going to invade Panama. We're going to invade Canada. We're going to invade Gaza. We're just Hitler-esque.
Listen, I don't mean to push this ahead.
Hitler's
go
a
ahead.
popular guy this afternoon. But anyway, Trump is leveling the playing field. If they remove their tariffs, the U.S. tariffs will be removed. That's all he's asking for. Fair trade. Fair trade. That's capitalism. That's free market.
Capitalism is a contract. A deal's a deal. He cut a deal with NAFTA. He's now breaching the contract. He cut the deal.
Alvin,
We are
want
a
to
net,
move on. I
we are a
think we
net
want to draw it to
exporter
an end.
of
okay,
oil.
Alvin, we have 5 minutes to go, and I know Luis has. and
Do
then
you
I
have
wanna
another
close it out.
student? Another student?
Well, my student had an interesting question, but I think you guys answered it.
Okay.
He texted me about, what our top, looking at what's going on with the industrializing and the
Okay.
selling things we manufactured and all of that. We don't manufacture anymore. But you guys are answering that from both
Okay.
sides of the spectrum. But I think Luis had a quick comment, and then
Okay.
I think.
Why don't we end with Luis, and unless you have
Okay.
announcements at
Well,
the end?
I have a closing, and then,
Okay,
but
Yeah,
Luis, you want to ask? Go ahead.
go ahead.
I would like to ask Dr. DeRosa a question, because you mentioned a few things to say. I think at one point you said, and I hope I didn't misunderstand you, but you said that we have been in a constitutional crisis, but you seem to call a constitutional crisis something different. I mean, there are a different interpretation, because in your opinion, the constitutional crisis was the fact that, or has been the fact that, the president has never had so much power. In other words, you say the power is in the hands of certain elites, the bureaucracy, you talk about the bureaucracy. But on the other hand, so in other words, it seems to me that you support a strong executive power. On the other hand, I think you also talk about the bureaucracy, that the bureaucracy, the agencies have a lot of power, and that is not matching the will of the people. My question is whether the bureaucracy is not a source of certain stability and security and certain procedures. I'll give you an example. What happened last week, that Jeffrey Goldberg received an invitation for a top security meeting. I wonder whether it is precisely those people who are in that bureaucracy that make sure that everything actually works like a machine, that everything is secure, that we check who is invited, or they are the people who run the business of the state every day, right? So my question is, if you remove that bureaucracy and you put people, I wonder whether you are not affecting the effectiveness of the state and the well-functioning of the state. The state, I mean government.
Okay, Louis, let me make a clarification. I am not an advocate of a strong executive authority or the imperial
Okay, I
president.
misunderstood you.
As a matter of fact, I'm opposed to government in principle, insofar as just the government fulfilling its responsibilities, the national government, that is, under Article 1, Section 8. That's it. Very limited powers. And if the government was constrained by those powers, we wouldn't be having this discussion, because the government wouldn't have the opportunity to step in directions that are contrary to certain national domestic interests. Insofar as my perspective, we have to keep in mind that the system was designed, now some would say this is antiquated, atavistic, whatever, but this is a federal republic. Most of the governing is supposed to be done at the state and local level. The states have, under the 10th Amendment, the reserved powers of the state. The states are responsible for health, safety, and morals of the respective citizens. So that's where the democracy can function, because the state government's in closer proximity to the people they have authority over. So the constitutional crisis is that now we have a unitary national government where the states are simply sort of extensions of the national government. They still have certain opportunities to break away, but now they're dependent upon intergovernmental transfers and so on. And the American mindset is the national government is everything. The states are simply peripheral to the governing system. So that's the constitutional crisis. And that's why it's a democracy cannot function at this level. It's just impossible. The people are too remote from the politicians, the political class that have authority over them. Even the president, you could go back to Nixon, his problem with the bureaucracy. The president can't control the bureaucracy. They are free agents. They're civil servants. There's little accountability. And they can appoint maybe 5,000 people within a population of 2 million federal employees, but most of those people end up going native. They get captured by the bureaucracies they're supposed to be controlling on behalf of the president, Democratic or Republican. So we have this sort of fourth estate, the administrative, deep state, whatever you want to call it, that are accountable to no one but their own self-interest. And that's what motivates people. We could talk all about the government officials are doing what's in the interest of the American people. That's not, in my opinion, true. The primary responsibility in their mind is their own self-interest. It's the old iron law of oligarchy, that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we're in a constitutional crisis. I don't see really any opportunity. And I might sound like I'm an advocate for the Trump administration. I don't trust the Trump administration. My opinion is it's just the trajectory is better than where we were headed under the Biden administration. It's buying us some time.
All right, I'm gonna throw this back to Steve with an announcement. We promised to get you all up at 6:30.
Right.
Thank you, Marshall.
So thank you, Alvin. First of all, this was an amazing webinar, or whatever we're calling it. Our goal was to hear from scholars with a wide range of opinions, and that's and sides. And we actually, although I think we all want good government, someone brought that up, but we heard from different viewpoints, and that's exactly what we wanted to do tonight. So I thank the panelists and Alvin. You guys were absolutely terrific. And I thank all in attendance, without whose presence and participation in the center would not exist. And for those who came late, the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research is a nonpartisan public policy organization, a research center, and a think tank. And please visit our website at palmbeachdemocracy.org. And if you happen to fall upon the donation button, feel free to make a tax-deductible donation. And with that, I once again thank our moderator, panelists, and all of you for attending, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
And,
Thank everybody.
People are invited to write articles if they have ideas.
Correct, right. We have an online journal of sorts, loosely put, and we accept articles, including Talia if you wanted to write one. Okay, and we're talking about that. Okay, bye. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all.